Hello my lovelies, welcome to my little cottage by the sea, the place where I love to stitch and craft my way to a vintage inspired and sustainable lifestyle. Now, a while ago I made a video called Getting Started with Pattern Cutting, which was just a sort of introduction, the ground rules so to speak, a bit of information that you might need should you want to start pattern cutting. I know a lot of people are really daunted at the idea of pattern cutting and think it's going to be incredibly difficult. It would be really disingenuous of me to say that pattern cutting is the easiest thing in the world, because it is something that you have to get to grips with. But once you crack it, once it starts to make sense, it's like this whole magical world opens up to you. I found pattern cutting incredibly difficult when I started my pattern cutting journey when I went to fashion college many moons ago. I found it really hard to get to grips with, and I also have dyscalculia, number dyslexia, so I really did find it very hard to access. Whether it's because of that, I've found a way to teach pattern cutting that seems to be quite accessible for the people that I've had in my real classrooms for the last 25 or so years, and I've actually come to really love pattern cutting, and it's what I've spent most of my career doing in one way or another for the last 30 years. In this video then, I want to build on that first video that I did, or really it was a second video, because I also did a video about how to create a block from a commercial pattern, which is an absolutely fine way to start if that is the way that you feel most comfortable. In this video, pattern cutting the basics, I'm just going to get going with the way in which we actually pattern cut, the basic principles, if you will. So some of these things, it might sound as if I'm being a little bit patronizing by explaining maybe how to draw a line or how to cut paper, but I do find that those skills that I was taught, the way I was shown, has actually stood me in really good stead. And if you get those basic principles right, then other things become a little bit easier. Also, I think about learning to sew. If you've got those really good basic techniques in your back pocket, sewing becomes easier. The confusion is when you don't know quite the right way to do something, but through practice you build up those skills and you become really confident, and that's exactly the same thing with pattern cutting. So if you haven't watched the pattern cutting Getting Started, then I suggest you watch that first and then come back to this video, and I'm going to show you how to pattern cut, so those basic principles, what you actually need to do, the techniques, and then we're going to look at blocks, and particularly the bodice block, and I'm going to start talking about how you start changing the block, start doing dart manipulation to create new designs from that basic foundation block. And then after that, I'm just going to share some other little bits and pieces that you might find helpful, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll feel confident enough to give pattern cutting a go. Here we are at my pattern cutting table, and what I have here is spot and cross pattern cutting paper, and you can of course use plain paper or brown paper for wrapping parcels, whatever it is, it just needs to be big enough to create pattern pieces on. I learnt to pattern cut on plain paper and then graduated to this paper, and the reason this is wonderful is that these spots and crosses basically show you your grain lines. You can get all your right angles, which are so important in pattern cutting, and you can very easily see where a line's going a little bit wonky, shonky, and it just works when you're pattern cutting a front and a back, and you can align your pattern pieces and so on. So that is why I really like this paper, and you can buy it quite easily in various forms on different websites. I buy mine from a company called Moreplan, which is based here in England. So I also have my pattern master here, and the reason that I like this, and I've used it for so many years, I've actually had this since I was in my early 20s, that's a very, very long time ago now, is that you have this center line here which basically creates your right angle, so you know immediately when you're going off of your right angles, which is very useful because you're not always necessarily going to be hitting these lines with whatever it is you're pattern cutting. So you can square from here, this line. You've also got your seam allowance gauge on this, and then around this curve as well. So this acts as a sort of French curve. I'm not particularly keen on these. I find it easier just to draw curves freehand. I learnt that way, had to learn that way, we were forced to learn that way, and as much as I resented it at the time, it's actually stood me in very good stead. I normally use a 2H pencil, very sharp pencil. This is pattern cutting, not life drawing, my old pattern cutting teacher used to say, but just for the sake of this, so that you can really clearly see what I'm doing, I'm using a fine liner. For this very simple pattern cutting exercise, and I suggest you start with very simple things like cushions or little pouch bags or so on. I'm pattern cutting some cuffs to revamp a winter coat, and I've worked out, measured that the circumference of them is 30 centimeters and I want a depth of 12. I also know that these squares between each of these is a 2 centimeter square, so I've got a good sort of way of judging measurements and whether I'm getting things right or not. The first thing that I'm going to do is just draw a line, hitting the middle of these spots and crosses as accurately as possible. And in pattern cutting we do work to the millimeter. This thing that I'm pattern cutting is not an issue about the millimeters or so on, but basically you want to draw a line through those spots and crosses. Now, as I said, I've got this right angle here, basically works as a set square. So what I can do is I can put that as accurately on that line as possible. Very useful if you are working on plain paper. And I've worked out that I want my cuff to be a depth of 12. So hitting through these spots and crosses, I know that I want to go up to this point here. And then I'm going to draw along through those spots and crosses as accurately as possible. And then at that point I'm going to work out the 30 centimeters. So these pattern masters, or the one that I have, sort of starts at 0 and goes up to 20. 0 starts up to 20. So I know that if I put 10 centimeters on that edge and then I come along to 20 here, if I was doing 20.6 mil, I'd be somewhere over here, which would make this a very, very useful thing to have, this sort of this set square. But you can get these results using a set square and a ruler, and I think these sort of plastic see-through rulers, measuring devices if you will, are much, much better. And then, I mean, all this is it's creating a rectangle, and that is essentially the cuff that is going to be sewn around the cuff of the coat in a faux fur. And then I want to put 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch if you're working in imperial. I can just put the seam allowance, the gauge line for 1.5 there, do a line, and then just do that all the way around. And the other reason this is so good is that basically every single one of these lines up with your grain line, so it's super easy when you put these as pattern pieces on your fabric to pin them down and cut them, it's really, really easy to see when you're off grain, which is one of those things that can make or break your sewing project. And then I always annotate, because if I don't, who knows what this is? Cuff for coat. So it's not rocket science at the end of the day. It's really about precision and just making sure that you, in my case, triple, quadruple check my mathematics, because I am inclined to get things wrong. Really, you're just wanting to draw the neatest, straightest, most accurate lines you can on whatever paper it is you happen to be using. Now we've had a look at the very, very basic 1, 2, 3 of pattern cutting, if you will, let's have a little look at the bodice block. There are many different ways that you can get your own bodice block. So I have already mentioned the video that I show you how to use a commercial sewing pattern to develop your own bodice block from. You can also buy slopers, which you can then sew up and fit in calico to you. I think many of the commercial sewing pattern companies have something like that. You can also go to an in real life class. I teach one at my local college, and that is a really good way of getting to grips with pattern cutting. If you are going to go to an in real life class, do make sure in the small print or the overview of the course that you are going to learn to pattern cut a block for your own size. I have noticed, because I do a bit of research and out of professional interest, that there are a few classes popping up now. There are a lot more pattern cutting classes popping up now than there were, say, 10 years ago. And quite a few of them are saying, learn to pattern cut a size 12 block. Well, unless you're a fashion student, there is no need to pattern cut blocks in other sizes. You need a block that fits you, because I'm assuming that, like me, you want to just pattern cut all the clothes that you see in magazines that you can't afford, or that are no longer made anymore. You might see them on an actress or actor in a film from the 40s and you want to make that. Some very dodgy photos later, I've got a snapshot of that thing and I can then pattern cut from that. I certainly do not recommend learning to pattern cut from another size. You want to pattern cut to you, and also your beautifully unique body is going to have different things needed from another size. So what works for you may not work for me, and vice versa. But building up confidence, you'll learn how to create beautiful things that fit your body beautifully. What do I mean when I say block? Well, the block is basically your foundation piece for a type of garment. So here I have my bodice block. So this is a close fitting bodice block. There are other kinds, and I have drafted this to fit me. And from this, by doing different types of dart manipulation or putting in style lines or doing all sorts of things, changing necklines and so on, I'm able to create all these myriad designs, including the dress that I'm wearing, which is a very early Vampire's Wife style dress that I made a long time ago. And there is actually a video about this. I made it to wear to a dear friend's wedding, and it is one of my most worn dresses. It's like a tracksuit, it's so comfortable. So you have a front and a back, and you work on the half in general, unless you're doing something asymmetrical sort of across the body. And from this I have created other blocks. So I've created a grown on sleeve dolman block, and I've also created a midi block. So you can create other blocks from this, and then you draft your skirt block, which is self-evident. And with this and your skirt block, you can create dresses, and I've even developed a coat block from these, a simple coat block. Over on Patreon currently we're working on a coat project, so it's a long sort of sew along, pattern cut along, sew along project. And also over there I've got all the instructions for my blocks. So these are all based on my calculations, mathematicals, tried and tested. And over there I think we've got the bodice block, also all these other blocks that you can develop from this, the skirt block, trouser block, which I'm just absolutely obsessed with at the moment. having drafted so many trousers from so many different calculations, I really feel like I've done something quite magic. Also a sleeve, so you've got this whole set of blocks that you can start creating the clothes of your dreams, really. And why shouldn't you have the clothes of your dreams? So here I am with my front bodice block, and this is a bespoke block that I've drafted to my own measurements using my particular formula to do so. But in books like this, Winifred Aldrich's pattern cutting book and other pattern cutting books, there will be formulas, and then also you can buy slopers. I also did a video about changing an existing bodice pattern piece just from a vintage commercial sewing pattern. It's a bit of an embarrassing video, but I did that. So there are different ways that you can get to this point, but it's really worth getting to this point. And what I wanted to do, seeing as in this video we're looking at the basic principles of pattern cutting and we're establishing those sort of tips and tricks, that best practice, I wanted to just talk through how you start to move the darts. And it's moving the darts and creating design features by moving the shaping. It's called dart manipulation. That is how you start to develop design ideas. So for example, this is a dress that I'm working on with my patrons, and it's based off of a 1930s shirt waister. It's called a shirt waister because it goes into a dress, but the shirt bit stops at the waist. If the buttons were all the way down the front, it'd be a shirt dress. So this is what we're working on, and I'm starting with this block, which looks very, very different to this drawing. But by doing certain dart manipulations and moving them, I can end up with this dress. So in this book and others, you can see from this page that we've got a sort of a whole load of front bodices here, and by moving them around the bodice you can sort of create all these different looks essentially. But there are a couple of important principles that you need to adhere to. It's kind of that learn to follow the rules and then you can understand which rules you can break. I'm sure there's a much more jazzy way of saying that, but basically I'm just going to show you how to move a dart using the slash method. That is not the Guns N' Roses guitarist, it's called the slash and spread or the slash and close. So I'm going to show you that, and to do that I'm going to draw around my bodice block and then cut it out as it is. And just to note, there's no seam allowance in my blocks. So just the first thing that I always do is to draw the centre front line like that, and then I balance the block along that line. So I'm going to draw around that and then cut it out, and then we're going to look at moving this dart somewhere else in the bodice. So just a little tip about cutting out when you're cutting your patterns, and this is how I was taught at university and it stood me in good stead. If you're right-handed, you'll want to keep your work on the left, and left-handed you'll want to keep it on the right. You basically want to be able to see your pattern, and you anchor your hand on the table so the scissors are actually leaning on the table, and you kind of pull the pattern towards you like so. So you're not cutting up in the air willy-nilly, you are cutting like so, and you just move that paper away. And if I haven't said it before, I'll say it again or now. Precision is really everything with pattern cutting. So it really pays to be accurate and get into the habit of doing these things in this particular way. It really does make a difference. I'm going to show you a really common dart manipulation, so just moving the dart. and I'm going to move this dart into this side seam. And you get this on a lot of dresses, modern and otherwise. Maybe you would think that essentially what you would do is you would measure that width and you'd plonk it there and redraw it and rub that out. That's not how you do dart manipulation. You need to move this volume, this shape, to somewhere else and close this and open up the shape somewhere else, and this is how you do it. I realise I should really be using a pen. I hope this pen works. So I'm just going to put this into the side seam. One of the most important things that you need to do is wherever you're going to open up this dart, you really need to take it into the bust apex, which is here. So this is the bust line, and your boob is somewhere in there. Now, you don't have to have the dart all the way to that pointy bit. That's absolutely fine. What you will find with a lot of 1950s patterns, that they took that dart right up into the apex. If you look at Marilyn Monroe's dresses and that sort of pointy boob, that is created by bringing that dart right up to the apex. But you can just decide how long you want that. It's also the reason why you've got that very flattering vintagey look on the Vampire's Wife dresses, because those are cut with this particular dart, or it's a French dart really, that goes from here and it goes right up to the bust apex, which gives that very pointy, hyper feminine look. So I'm gonna have my dart here, and this is the slashing, so I'm gonna cut into that point there, and basically now that's just a cut line. But if I close this one, so you want to sort of keep your neckline intact and sort of make life easy. So if I close it that way, I'm going to get all this paper there, which is just, you know, annoying. And I'm just going to close that, fold that out as neatly as possible, which is not very neatly at all, as it turns out, but there. Okay, so that's there like that. I can just stick that out the way, and as you can see, that dart is now open there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stick some paper under there and just bring my dart apex back to wherever I want to bring it back to. Paper's stuck under here, and I am going to just decide, because I have boobaliciousness going on, that I'm going to just bring that back 7 centimeters from that apex. That should be a nice flattering length. So this is the dart apex over here, and these are the dart legs. One of the things I don't like about this sellotape, normal sticky back plastic as it's called on Blue Peter, is that right in the middle, yeah, is that it sort of, you can't draw on it. The Scotch tape stuff you can actually draw on, so as you can see, it's not really sort of sitting on there properly, but it's all I had to hand. So that is now your dart there, and this dart is actually going up to the apex. So this is the waist dart, these are the legs. The way I do my blocks is I've got sort of the darts going at several lengths, so it just gives me maximum versatility. You don't find that on all blocks, that's just something that I specifically do. I'm sure other people do it as well, but it's just, it's not the most common thing. And then we've got this sort of seam here that we've got to make sure we get the right shape. So to do that, I'm going to close that. It gives you the opportunity to make sure that that's in alignment, and you can tweak it. And then I'll use my tracing wheel and just go over that a couple of times And I know you probably won't be able to see terribly clearly from where you are, but there are little dots. So I'm just going to join those dots like so. And I can now cut that out. And I have moved that dart nice and easily to the side there. And I can carry on with whatever dressmaking project it is I'm doing, pattern cutting dressmaking project I'm doing, that has this waist dart and this side seam dart. So along with my actual real size blocks, which are drafted to my measurements, I also have my quarter scales. So these are a quarter scale to a standard size 10 or 12, I think. I've just sort of drafted them out in mini, and they are really useful for just practicing different types of pattern cutting ideas. So I've got my block there, the bodice block, I've got a skirt, I've got the trouser, and then I've also got a sleeve. And what that means is that instead of doing these big patterns, I can try out ideas. This was something that we had to do at university. So with the pattern cutting books that we used at the time, you could try out all the different exercises in there, try out loads of different ideas. I like to use these when I'm trying to figure out a way in which to achieve a certain pattern for a dress that I've seen maybe in a 1930s pattern book. And I like to make sure that when I'm teaching my lovely Coven members, patrons, or I'm doing something with students in real life, or even if, not that I do this anymore particularly, but when I was pattern cutting for designers and pattern cutting wedding dresses for bespoke clients, I could just practice a few different ideas to see what sort of got me the best results. And of course, pattern cutting in this size and this scale is slightly different to pattern cutting on the actual body, but you do save a little bit of time, at least I think you do, and you just get to practice loads. So I have a set of quarter scale blocks, which includes the bodice and the skirt as a PDF pattern that you can buy from www.taradeighton.co.uk if you want to get practicing. Anything that helps you build your confidence, I think, is really beneficial. And then I have all my blocks together as a collection on Patreon, which you can buy as a one-off, or of course you could come and join Patreon, and there's all of those, and then all the tutorials for making all different things using your own bespoke blocks. So that is all there. And of course there's all sorts of other places that you can get your blocks from, so you do not have to come to me, you can go wherever you like. It's just a little invitation. So I do hope that you found this video slightly compartmentalized, bitty, here and there video, but I really wanted to go over those basic principles, the basics of pattern cutting with you. Should you be thinking about wanting to learn pattern cutting, I really urge you to give it a go. I think actually once you get in the swing of it, it's easier than buying patterns and then having to tweak and fit them, which is always the issue with commercial patterns. And then as somebody who loves Dior and Vampire's Wife, which is no longer even available, should it even be in my size, or clothes from the 30s, 40s and 50s and 70s particularly, I can't buy those clothes. And the only way for me to be able to have things like that is to draft my own patterns. And what that means is you just don't have to compromise in any way, shape or form. If this has whet your appetite, then do have a little look at the video from a very long time ago, a little bit embarrassing, cringy probably for me, but how to create a bodice block from a commercial pattern. That is there on the channel. And of course I do all of this all the time over on Patreon. Should you wish to come along and become part of my Patreon community, we'd all really love to have you there. If you've already got your blocks and you fancy just diving in, then I did do a video about pattern cutting a simple blouse, this lovely Pierrot blouse that is based on sort of 1930s blouses with lovely collars. That's there as a step-by-step tutorial that you can follow and draft a blouse like that for your very self. as ever, my lovelies, thank you so much for taking the time to spend the time with me here in my little cottage by the sea. And I really do look forward to hearing about your pattern cutting adventures if you decide to give it a go. I am here to hold your hand if you need me. You know where to find me. I shall see you very soon. Till next time, my lovelies. Bye.